はい、こんにちは。1年前にこういう動画作ったじゃないですか。で、当時は、そんなにあの、誰も見てくれないんじゃないかなって思ってたんですけど、もうある時から、いきなりバズって、もうすごいな、本当にびっくりしたんですよね。うん。で、また、1年が経ったんで、そろそろ作ろうかなって思って、はい、えっと、楽しんでいただければありがたいですね。はい。Hello everyone. It's been a little over a year since my last update video, so I thought I'd make another one to talk a bit about how far I've come over the last year. A lot of things have happened over the past year. I've been living in Japan for the last 9 months, and I was working in retail in Tokyo for over 6 months, all while continuing to consume Japanese content in my free time. In my last update video, I talked about how I was at a level where I was very comfortable reading and listening to most native content, but that I still struggled with speaking simply because I lacked much experience and opportunity actually speaking much. I plan to talk about how and to what extent living here for the past 9 months has actually improved my speaking, listening, reading, and writing ability. First, listening. Last year I mentioned I was very comfortable with my listening as I could listen to most podcasts and watch most films with little difficulty. I still mostly feel the same, but I do think my listening has improved in some areas. For example, I've become much more adept at following along to group conversations. Anyone who's learnt a foreign language probably knows that there's a world of difference between two natives speaking to each other and a group of 3 or more. When I first started my retail job after coming here, I would occasionally get a bit lost hearing group conversations between multiple people, but this gradually disappeared over the weeks and months that followed. I would also say I've picked up quite a few new words from my experience working here. Words for things like everyday objects, words specific to the industry I was working in, and some slang here and there I'd not heard until then. Overall, there's been a slight discernible improvement in my listening comprehension, but it was already at a decent level to begin with when I moved here, so there wasn't any remarkable change. Speaking. Since coming to Japan, I've obviously had a lot more opportunity to actually speak the damn language, so there's a lot I have to talk about here. How my speaking ability has changed and some insights I've had about speaking and output in general. In my last update video, I talked about how I still struggled a bit with speaking, but that I felt like I had the potential to speak well, a sort of latent ability that would be activated if I were to spend a few weeks in a totally Japanese environment. I have definitely improved quite a bit, but not as much as I imagined I would improve by living here 9 months. Before I came to Japan, I imagined I would be speaking Japanese all the time every day, but I actually found myself speaking far less than I would have imagined. For a start, I live alone, so if I don't go out, I have no opportunity to speak. Secondly, going out alone, to the shops, to restaurants, cafes, etc. doesn't require any output save for maybe a few short phrases. For example, today I've literally only had to speak one word in Japanese when I went to the convenience store and the clerk asked me if I needed a bag. I have managed to make friends with people with whom I exclusively speak Japanese, but even then, meeting friends frequently is challenging. It's such a big city that you could end up having to travel 20 hours just to meet up, and most people have other commitments, so you have to plan like 2 years in advance before meeting them. Not to mention, the money required for transport and meals builds up and can end up costing a fortune. If you're a student, this probably won't be a problem though. So while I do have relationships that are facilitated through Japanese, this might only add up to a few hours a week of actual interaction. Working in retail, I definitely had more chance to output, but even then I wasn't speaking as much as I would have assumed. There would be hours doing shelf work when I wouldn't need to say a word, and on the cash register, although I had to speak a lot, I would tend to repeat the same phrases over and over and over again. During lunch break was really the only time I would get to have regular conversations. One interesting thing I found was that on the days I was working in a fully Japanese environment, I actually felt as if my Japanese would deteriorate. I would struggle to get out the words and I had a lot of trouble communicating. Then, on my days off, even when I had little exposure to the language, I suddenly felt much more fluent. This is because the job was rather stressful and I grew quite a distaste for it. I often felt very tired and demotivated at work, which also led to decreased confidence when speaking. I also discovered that maybe working a high-pressure, low-paid shitty job is not necessarily conducive to happiness and life satisfaction. How could I have known? Since coming to Japan and attempting to speak the language in a variety of different circumstances, I've become acutely aware of how these factors impact my spoken ability. I'm astounded by the difference in fluency depending on the situation and my mood. When I'm tired, stressed, and feeling less confident, I struggle to put a simple string of words together, and my Japanese is a broken mess. On the other hand, when I'm well rested, in a good mood, and in a comfortable environment, there are times when I actually shock myself at how smoothly I'm able to communicate. Of course, I was aware of this before, and I may have even mentioned it in my last update video, but I've really come to appreciate how massive the impact of things like environment and mood can have on one's spoken ability. I don't want to downplay the amount of speaking I have done since I came here though. Even though I'm not outputting as much as I expected, I've still had endlessly more opportunities to speak compared to when I was in other countries, and I have definitely improved substantially. And now for the big question, am I fluent? I would feel confident to call myself fluent now, but that fluency is still quite limited. For daily conversations and chatting with friends, usually I can have a smooth, enjoyable chat without many hurdles, even if I occasionally get stuck on a phrase or can't find the right word. When it comes to more complex topics and intricate explanations, I struggle quite a bit. There also seems to be a sort of warm-up period necessary to speak fluently. When I try to start speaking, for the first 10 to 20 minutes my speech is rather clunky, but after that I get into the groove and become able to start speaking a bit more fluidly, accurately, and effortlessly. As soon as I get past that warm-up period, I can have conversations for hours without much problem. Another thing I find difficult about speaking is the pronunciation. I'm not talking about accent or sounding native or anything like that. I mean producing the sounds in a clear, accurate way and with a relatively consistent flow. Perhaps enunciation is a more suitable word. Oftentimes, speaking Japanese feels like a tongue twister, and I feel like I constantly have to stop and pause after every word so I don't get tongue-tied. I have to use so much effort and concentration to produce the sounds clearly and accurately. I'd imagine this would be true for most people attempting to speak any foreign language though, and it probably goes away after years of consistent speaking practice. One final observation I'd like to add is to do with how consciously aware I am of my speech. Somewhat paradoxically, I find the less I concentrate on what to say and how to say it, the more easily it comes out. Because unfortunately, I spent so much time a few years back concentrating hard on analysing and hearing every detail in my immersion, it can be really hard, maybe even impossible, to totally turn off my brain and stop myself from overthinking while speaking. But nonetheless, when I'm less aware, and when I have less conscious interference, my speaking fluidity improves by leaps and bounds, and becomes much more relaxed and effortless. Now for reading. I have for the most part been comfortable with reading and kanji for quite a few years now. I have experience reading many novels and non-fiction books, and I can easily read any general material made for educated adult natives. That is to say, if I were to enter a Japanese bookstore, I could probably pick any book from the bestsellers corner and read it without difficulty. Of course, I still come across words I don't know, and I'd struggle to read writing that's very technical, academic, or archaic, but this doesn't bother me in the slightest, because I could say the exact same thing for my native language. The one major difference I am aware of between reading my native English and reading Japanese is my reading speed. My Japanese reading speed is still significantly slower than my English. This is perhaps not too surprising, considering I spent the first 20 years of my life buried in English texts, having completed all my education in the English language, and having lived in an English-speaking country for more than 20 years of my life. Now writing. Casual texting with friends I believe I can do quite effortlessly, even though it takes longer compared to writing messages in English. When it comes to more complicated writing, emails for example, I struggle more, mostly because of the keigo and formalities required for this style of communication. Although I've never personally attempted this, I'd imagine I wouldn't face too many issues were I to try and write something like a blog post or a diary entry. Something like an essay on the other hand, which requires much more grammatical accuracy and structural coherence, would prove more difficult, I think. Since I came to Japan, I've also started relearning to handwrite the kanji, and I've reached a point where I can comfortably write most of the kanji in common words. Conclusion. Since I quit my Japanese job, my exposure to the Japanese language has plummeted, but I still try to listen about an hour a day to podcasts, and I try to read a bit before bed. While my listening and reading are definitely at a comfortable level, as I said before, I'm still unsatisfied with my spoken ability. While it has improved quite noticeably over the past year, and I definitely have enough to get by and to maintain social relations without any English, it's still far from as fluid and as effortless as I would have hoped. This may sound like perfectionism, but it's precisely because I feel my own latent ability and recognize my own unexploited potential that I feel dissatisfaction with my current ability to output. And I know that if I were in an environment in which I could speak for at least maybe an hour a day, I would be able to attain this desired level within a relatively short period. Short of becoming a student here or getting hired at a Japanese company, none of which are options I'm actually considering, realistically it could be difficult to get the opportunity to output this much in my current situation, so I will probably have to continue to improve at a somewhat slow rate over the next few years. But looking on the bright side, I have reached a level where I can have normal conversations and consume content for pure enjoyment whenever I want to, which is quite an achievement, and it's what I set out to achieve in the first place. I do have a lot of fun when speaking with people in Japanese, and it's a very rewarding experience to be able to connect with other people in a totally foreign language. While the Japanese language and interaction with it will still remain part of my life, I'm not as concerned with improving anymore and would like to spend my time on other projects, including making videos. In the near future, I am also planning to learn a new language with only input and no study whatsoever, and I intend to document my experience on this channel. Now I'll speak a bit in Japanese for the rest of the video.
はい、というわけで、これから、ちょっとこれからの予定とか、このチャンネルをどの方向に向かせるつもりなのかみたいな、そういうことについて、ちょっとお話しできればなと思います。後々ね、他の動画で、もうちょっと詳しくお話しするつもりなんですけど、とりあえずざっくりとちょっといろいろ話せればなと思います。はい。じゃあまずは、主に3つのポイント、3つに絞ったんですけど、1つ目は、対談。そう。なんかね、つまり他のゲストを呼んで、言語学習について話したり、あと他の人の、経験談とか、ちょっとインタビュー、インタビューみたいな動画も作りたいんですけど、できればインタビューっていうよりも、対談みたいな、そういう感じの動画をちょっと作ってみたいなって思ってて、はい。で、実際これから作るつもりなんですね。別に今のところはね、知ってる人いないんですけど、ね、だからまずそういう出てくれる方を探さなきゃいけないんですけど、そうですね。あと2つ目は、オンラインコミュニティを作りたいですね。はい。何から始めればいいのかちょっとわかんないんですけど、ディスコードか作ったりとか、このチャンネルを、見てくれてる人、あと別にこのチャンネル見てないんだけど、イマージョンっていうね、その学習について、ちょっと興味のある方が、交流できるところ、交流できる場所、ちょっとあったらいいなって思ってて、これから作るつもりなんですね。具体的にどうやって作ればいいのか、全然そういうね、それ全然わかんないんだけど、とにかくやってみたいと思います。はい、あと3つ目なんですけど、旅動画ですね。はい。僕はね、旅行が大好きなんで、最近全然行ってないんだけどね、旅行。そう、金なくて、もう行ってないんだけど、去年、いろんな国に旅行したんですね。日本に来る前は。で、その時は結構いろんな動画撮ってたんで、いろんな映像が残ってるんですね、パソコンに。で、それを、編集したりして、 まあ、ちゃんと動画作ればいいなって思ってて、でもまだ作ってないんですね。まだ全然、始めてないんですけど。はい、でも、まあ、できれば、ね、近いうちに、なんか、旅行動画かなんかを作れたら、なんかいいなと思いますね。はい。あと、そう、だからこのチャンネルは、確かにその言語学習についての、なんか、そういうトピックを主に扱ってる、チャンネルですけど、旅行っていうのは、別に言語学習と全くなんか関係がないってわけじゃないじゃないですか。だから、作ってみようかなって。あと、とにかくまず、一本の旅動画を出して、で、どういう反応が、なんか来るかみたいな。それちょっとなんか探ってみたいと思って、で、その後、なんか反応が結構良かったりすると、また、他の動画も、ちょくちょく作ってみようかな。はい。そんな感じですね。はい。えっまあ、まず、最後まで見てくれてる人、どんだけいるかわかんないですけど、とにかく、ちょっとお礼を伝えたいと思って、そう、なんか、さっきも言ったんですけど、えっもう最初に出した動画は、もう本当にもうそんなに、もう今はね、なんか5万回以上再生されてて、で、上げた時は、もう全くなんか夢にも思わなかったんですよね。なんかそんなに伸びるとは。で、この動画も、まあ、そそれほそれほど伸びるかどうかわかんないんですけど、うん。でも、それでもなんか、登録者数も増えてきたし、そう、本当にありがたいなってしか思えないですね。はい。じゃあ、ありがとうございます。はい、次の動画で。